Hi everyone, welcome to the session of our web series, Fireside Chat with Champions, in which we interview global business leaders asking them crowdsourced questions relevant to the biggest challenge we face today, COVID-19 and its impact on various aspects of business and the way we can steer ourselves clear in current uncertainties. Today we have a very special guest with us, Rob Hulme. He is the Asia Director and co-founder of Beanstalk Agtech. Beanstalk aims to bridge this and scale disruptive agri-food technology to help reinvent the food system across Asia Pacific. At Beanstalk, based in Singapore, Rob works actively with innovators, agribusiness corporates, investors, and government agencies across Asia Pacific. He's involved with several AgriFoodTech Accelerators and NGO advisory boards and mentor role for startups in Australia, Singapore, and China, and is sought-after speaker. Currently, projects include vertical farming systems, plant-based proteins, marine plastics, and waste-to-energy. Rob is a global agribusiness executive who still likes to get his hands dirty. His family still operates a fifth-generation cropping and sheep operation in Australia. And this drives Rob's passion for our food system. He has qualification in Egg Science from University of New England and business from Harvard University, Harvard International Business School, and University of Melbourne. He is also a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors. Rob has over 28 years of global experience in research, operations, strategies, and mergers and acquisitions. His most recent roles with Bayer in Asia included country head Vietnam and Greater China, and head of APAC Business Development and ASEAN Innovation for the Bayer Group. Thanks, Rob, for accepting our invitation. I would request you to let our viewers know a bit more about you and your current interest in activities. Floor is yours.
Deepak, thanks very much for having me. I think you did a great job of making an introduction. As you said, I find myself here in Singapore after traveling around the world and feeling a little bit like I still feel as though I'm a farmer, born and bred, fifth generation farmer. So we grew up, the summers were long and hot, getting around as kids with shorts and no shirt and, working, helping parents out on the property and sort of 30 odd years later or more, I find myself in Singapore in the middle of what's arguably one of the biggest shifts in food production systems globally. I was very fortunate in my career after graduating from university to be offered a position with a predecessor company for Bayer. Starting in research and moving through to marketing and sales, and then into, as you said, into global roles of mergers and acquisitions and country management. And I think all of that, what probably frames that up is looking for opportunities, always eager to learn. And I've never stopped learning. I learn every day from people, and it's amazing when you bring smart people together into a room. They've got expertise and experience that amazing things can happen.
Very well articulated. In fact, you have worked with one of the very innovative company in past. Like I'm a huge fan of Bayer because I also have understood the impact they had on the agriculture and the food system globally. And in fact, I fully agree with you that anybody in AgTech need to understand the farming first. So even when 4 years back, when as a technopreneur I thought of getting into agriculture, I went across the South Asia, from Indonesia to Vietnam to India. I've worked with the farmers. In fact, I've harvested more than 10 crops, from rice to wheat to millets to fruits and vegetables. So I believe that you need to understand the pain of the farmer and the whole process itself. Otherwise, you won't be able to do justice to the system. So that brings us, Rob, to our first question, that with such a wide experience in this industry, we would like to understand from you that COVID definitely would be having impact, just like other industry, on agriculture also. So we would like to understand that what that impact do you see would be there on the food security, the production of the food, the processing of the food, and the entire value chain, where actually there would be a lot of disruption because of ancillary services as well as the industry itself. So what are your views on that?
Yeah, like obviously it's a huge amount of disruption in and around food production systems. And it's nothing like a black swan event like COVID, although arguably something like this has been predicted for a while. It's just that to the scale and the extent of it, perhaps no one forecast. And so what it highlights, if for nothing else, is that we have a really complex, fragile, at times at-risk food supply chain. And partly I think we're in a position we are now where this approach to any food, anytime, anywhere is really creating expectation for consumers that if they go to the supermarket, they can purchase more or less anything, which is a function of the global food supply chain. And so in these times where that system is broken, either from the sourcing of intermediates for production or supply chains for processing, like we saw from Tyson, and other processors, meat processors in North America and also Australia, also through to air freight, simple reliance on domestic flights for shipping or exporting fresh produce up into Asia from Australia. And so, notwithstanding all of those pressures, at the end of it, the impact is on people and businesses and livelihoods. And so, governments that have responded through support mechanisms, support programs, the JobKeeper type allowances have been rolled out in various countries. Really innovative thinking about how to work around solutions for export, for instance. And I think that is going to have some impact for some time. My biggest concern at the moment is that we see short-term impacts from cash crops like vegetables that are on a shorter planting cycle. And yet I think that the longer-term impacts are possibly still to come with, genetics for animal breeding, animal production, which are a longer-term play, or annual crops, or not planting plantations, so perennial crops. That there's less incentive, perhaps, to plant those crops where farmers would have had their confidence in markets to be able to do that. And if you see all the images on the TV of dumping milk and produce, that creates uncertainty, and there's nothing the markets dislike more is risk and uncertainty. So that doesn't augur well for investment. And so from that perspective, I think that's a particular risk.
Perfect. So Rob, actually, continuing the same chain of thought, do you think that actually, once we are out of COVID, people would be thinking through what to do, what need to be done in food and agriculture system? Because the way we were doing that farming till now, it has not been sustainable, right? So we have seen that actually, overuse of water, abuse of chemical and fertilizers, all those things, because we are going through a reset phase, there is a possibility that we might be able to rethink it. But do you think that the seriousness is there to think the environmental impact and the right way of doing agriculture going forward, or it would be the business as usual once COVID stems?
Look, I'm a little bit more of an optimist, perhaps a little bit naive, but I'd like to think that we have amazing examples of best practice from around the world for farming and production systems, from regenerative agriculture platforms in Australia and also North America, through to the use of digital technologies as one enabling technology to drive production efficiency, and also to help get product through to consumers while minimizing waste. I think, if anything, this has highlighted the importance of waste in the whole equation. I mean, we talk about, lots of talk about feeding 10 billion people by 2050 and how we have to increase production capacity by 70%. I don't believe that. I think it's more of a nuanced approach to addressing not just production capacity, but also waste and how we generate waste and how we value waste streams. And if you think about from crop waste to processing waste, supply chain, waste to distribution centres, there are lots of opportunities for offtake evaluating through biodigestion of retail waste all the way up through to valorisation of aseptic food grade products into new products, say for snacks. So taking waste vegetables, for instance, and transforming those into snacks. So there are really innovative businesses that are addressing this, that have come as a result of acknowledging this issue. At the same time, and having been part of the crop protection industry, what we saw in China, for instance, China is an amazing country, lots and lots of similarities. In fact, more similarities really around the world with farmers and farming systems than what you might think. One of the things, though, that struck me in China was the overuse of older crop protection chemistry. And so if you think about sustainable or even resilient crop and animal production systems, the underlying denominator in that is acknowledging that there is a best practice, particularly in Asian farming systems with 500 odd million smallholder farming family units. So it's as much around extension of good agricultural practice and existing technologies as it is about developing totally new solutions to try and get those through to the market.
You're perfectly right. In fact, I also am amazed with the work China has been able to do in a lot of areas, and for sure in increasing the productivity in the agriculture domain. I was in China. I actually visit China at least once a year, and in one of the session I was with the World Economic Forum, I met Mr. Jack Ma. And believe me, like, he said, manufacturing, we did it in the past and we are already good in that, right? And agriculture is the next focus. So by 2050, they want to be like, a huge exporter of food produce globally. So yes, we have to learn a lot from China for sure. Now, Rob, you just touched upon a subject of digital agriculture. So when you interact with people, like, people always talk about it's difficult to scale up digital technologies in agriculture. And recently, when I was doing this fireside chat and I interacted with a lot of tech professionals, and they said that actually COVID did what the government policies, the business model was not able to do for decades. So now going forward, how do you see the digital technology in agriculture, right? Their adoption, how easy or challenging it would be? And also, which are the specific technology do you see would be having far more impact than the others?
Yeah, good question. Look, we through Beanstalk, we're involved with a number of accelerators, across Asia. We only focus on Asia Pacific, and we're sort of sitting at that intersection between investors, industry or agribusiness, and innovators. And we really believe that whilst there's amazing technology, often post-accelerator flying around, it's not able to land. And there's a key reason for that is that perhaps in the business framing or the business canvas, there's not enough thought that's gone into addressing it and framing up the challenge. And so when you think about designing solutions, our belief is that actually the solution already exists. By definition, agriculture is a lagging industry in terms of investment. Typically, you get those front end loading investment in mining and infrastructure and medicine and other sectors. And we believe that there are technologies that have already been invented, already in use, already have a business case with sunk capital cost that can be actually identified, adapted, translated into solving particular problems. And that's one aspect of speed to market and having solutions which may not be the perfect solution, but addresses challenges that producers or agribusiness corporates or family enterprise have in their production system. Having said all of that, I think when you frame up those challenges, you've also got to have a business case. And so it's not just, there's too much focus on the technology itself, and not enough on the outcomes of what you're trying to achieve, and actually identifying commercial offtake and who's actually going to pay for that technology. So how are you disrupting? How are you actually shifting value rather than actually adding more cost into the system? How are you disrupting that system to bring about change. And there's one, and I know you have a particular focus around ag technologies, including like blockchain. There's lots of talk, lots of hype, lots of promises made around blockchain, and yet I think when you look at applications after you digitize a portfolio, there actually are some really strong business cases for blockchain-enabled platforms. And one of those, by way of an example, is Rice Exchange. So they're a young company that I advised to. They're focused on blockchain-enabled transparency to bring, for rice pricing. So we don't have a global transparent rice price. So trading is a very fragmented system, as you'd be aware. And lots of default between sellers and buyers, and lots of intermediaries or traders and brokers. The initial thesis around RiceX was, driving value by reducing default for buyers, and at the same time for smallholder farmers, creating a transparent rice price platform so that they could make more informed choices. Actually, what's transpired is that actually working with the shippers and insurance companies and banks, they see it as a risk mitigation response. And so there's a separate revenue stream or value add in disrupting that, that supply chain and shifting the value to either end in particular. And it's a really good example where you can apply a piece of technology to actually have a really positive outcome. So they're rolling out at the moment. I think, look, there are lots of examples. Drones in China, which we were involved with back in 2012. Our role with Bayer there was more facilitating formulations for low volume application, because you're talking 10 to 15 litres per hectare. So the old oil and water emulsion ULV applications came back into the fore. But enabling that technology that actually gets smallholder farmers out of a rice paddy, slogging around for 4 and 5 hours to spray a hectare, rather than having a drone do it much more efficiently, much more safely, and allowing the farmer to get out of that paddy. And they can do that, a drone can spray a hectare in about 10 to 15 minutes. And so, whilst I think that's a really good example of a technology that has a really specific, clear application, clear business case, what we do see in Southeast Asia, there are more challenges around rolling out that business case and having service providers and a central platform to enable that technology. So that's I think an area of focus. I know drone companies operating also out of Singapore, but across Southeast Asia are focused on. And I think also lots of opportunity for South Asia, so for India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, for growers, also down to Sri Lanka, for growers to adopt that technology. I think that'll be a game changer.
No, very well articulated, Rob. Actually, you'll be surprised. I've had interaction with so many people, and believe me, the clarity with you talked about the technology, right? Very, very limited in the industry, and we need more people like you, so that actually we don't have tons of startups doing something which would be relevant only maybe in 1/100th of what they are doing. So adding value is most important. Understand farming, right? Disruption is not just for sake of disruption, but actually solving a problem. These are very, very relevant, pertinent questions you have been areas you've focused on. Because blockchain, I also work, believe me, with a lot of startups talking about blockchain. And every time I reject their project, whenever I'm mentoring or whether I'm as a jury somewhere, because it's just in hype, believe me. We'll collect data, we'll make the data more transparent, we'll make ABCD, but they lacked what you said. Solve a problem like the rice payments doesn't happen, fraud happens. Let's solve that. That's the problem we solve. Getting blockchain pushed into agriculture is not a problem solution, right? Getting the value out of it is a problem solution, and very, very rightly articulate. So here I would like to ask one more little question, because I also get confused when a lot of people ask me this, and I myself, I'm not having answer for that. There is a lot of focus on collecting data on agriculture, right? I'm seeing companies saying that I'm having data for what farmer did 5 years back. I'm having data farmer what he did 3 years back, right? So that's why value me at $1 billion. Do you believe that the agriculture data, which actually is not validated data, because it's very difficult to validate, is even making sense to collect such a humongous amount of data, right, which might not be relevant. So that's my perspective. What's your view on that? Like, company believing data is oil also in agriculture. Do you think that flies in agriculture?
Yeah, look, I think we've seen lots of business cases in the past, been involved in some of them that have failed miserably because, you're not actually translating data to intelligence and decision support. We see this in precision agriculture, which is sort of more transitioning to decision agriculture. But again, the companies I think that have been successful, it's not about the front end, having a jazzy app that is, it's more about how does a farmer take the overlay in the various operations and through the life cycle of a crop or an animal production system. How do they actually put that together and make sense of that so that they're able to make decisions that particular day? It's you can't make management decisions in retrospect. You can look back and use history, say in soil mapping or soil moisture mapping, and yet farmers need to actually know how to, they need information to make particular decisions and understand the impact that it has on the overlay of those 20 or 30 sort of truthing points that farmers deal with every season. A company that we really like is AgWorld out of Western Australia. They're slightly different in that yes, they operate a SaaS platform, but they've really thought about matching the data, how the data talks, and how the data between the farmer, the bank, and the agronomist, and making sure that it talks to each other. And that has a really big impact on the timing of the decision and the accuracy of the decision. I think there are some other really good companies, of course. Cropin from India is gaining a lot of traction, and I think they have a really diverse, really interesting portfolio. I don't know enough about how they're driving their algorithms and how the data pieces are talking, but I do think that moving away from more of a decision point that requires lots of input from an individual and training algorithms to actually take that role. In the same way that digital technology in any industry is taking away dirty, dangerous, and dull type activities, right? So you're trying to free up resources that you would otherwise spend in front of a system analysing data, or something where you're in a position like the drones we talked about, where perhaps you're putting yourself at risk. Remove that aspect and use technology for an outcome that frees up resources for what humans do best, and that's more about intuition and insights and decision making.
Perfect. So Rob, actually that brings us to something a little bit more on you handling COVID and your organization handling COVID. You see that COVID is just not about it's a business challenge, or it is just a challenge related to the economy. It is also a challenge on a personal basis as well as an organizational structure itself. How you see that actually you and your organization, right, has been able to being strong when the time has been very, very tough, because a lot of startup will be also going through that phase where the revenues have dried up. Suddenly you are having a lot of pressure where actually productivity is not there. In agriculture, it becomes a little bit more difficult because you need to have people on field, right? It's not always the Zoom call is what is gonna work, right? For example, being in agritech, I'm facing those challenges, reaching out farmer becomes difficult. Your ground team are not able to move because of lockdowns. Farmer don't want you to be with them for a very simple reason. They're scared that you will get them infected with COVID because you come from the urban area, you come from the cities, right? So how you have seen that COVID and how you have faced those challenges and still being very, very strong?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit ironic because by and large, to a large extent, farming as an operation, as a career, as an ecosystem is by definition isolated. So I think in particular broad agriculture, where farmers are by themselves on a tractor, or they've been in self-isolation for many years. I think where the industry struggles is there's perhaps an expectation that in agriculture we need to create lots of face-to-face meetings. So those offline meetings in order to share information, to network, which is also important, but to drive content. And I think what you'll see, and what we're already seeing, is a shift in how conferences and how exhibitions are actually run in the future. It's a little bit like, when you've got a rubber band, an elastic band, and you stretch it under pressure, like COVID. There are three things that can happen. The rubber band breaks, so you have a totally new outcome. So you start doing something new. The rubber band stays the same, and so you might stop doing something, or that it returns to the old way of doing things. I don't think, in terms of conferencing, that we'll see the extent of this mass migration that happens, and there'll be more an embracing of digital technology, online, offline engagement. Where that is difficult, of course, is how do you, in running business with existing clients and existing transactional partners, that's okay, but in terms of doing business development and chasing new leads, that's challenging. In the case of Beanstalk, we're anyway we are digital nomads. That's the way we set our business up. We have offices in Melbourne, Perth, Sydney, and my office here in Singapore. And I think that level of engagement, I think what will need to change is probably Zoom and Zoom fatigue. I think where people were having face-to-face engagement around a water cooler in a workplace or in a co-working environment. I think that's currently being replaced by a digital engagement, and I think there'll be new iterations, second and third generations iterations of digital tools that enable this online offline engagement. So I think we'll see a transition in that regard. And it's, I think I laughed the other day because you can dial up a llama or onto your Zoom call, and I think when you have to start dialing up llamas to keep engaging your Zoom audience, that's when things are getting bad. So I can see the use of online tools. We're already using those online whiteboards for engagement. Means that probably even in the future, even if you go back to normal, we would probably continue to use those because we think that's much more efficient with our time. And you can imagine, at the moment, there'd be CFOs around the world, looking at travel and entertainment budgets at zero, and that's setting a new normal also. So challenging, why do you actually need to travel? And at the same time, is that a value shift, and where you can actually make investments in other places rather than establishing massive offices and massive regional presence.
That's true, and in fact, you've seen that the agrochemical industry has been very, very heavily investing on the expenses on business development, right? The meeting with the farmers, the meeting with the distributors. I've attended some of them, and they're very exotic. So maybe that is going to stop, and that will save a lot of money for even the agrochemical companies also.
It's like necessity is the mother of invention. I think I saw a really innovative tool the other day, actually from an staff member, colleague I employed, a really, really smart guy, much smarter than me. Yifan is now running the Bayer seeds operation in China with an online, offline engagement using cameras. So like a virtual engagement. And I thought that really signaled how they're approaching and trying to adapt. And I thought we'll continue to see that, because I think one thing we haven't talked about is the new normal. Under COVID, I can't see that this disruption, whether it comes in second waves or ongoing disruption. You know, for the foreseeable future, it means 2021, possibly through 22, until we get to a point where it's either manageable or we have vaccines or a much more consistent way to manage infection and risk. There's going to be disruption, and we just have to live with that and find ways to adapt. I noticed over the weekend there was an article in Bloomberg that Singapore government is spending 20 billion, so they're dipping into their reserves and spending 20 billion to repivot into digital and innovation, including food security. And so I think, you know, there's an acknowledgement that this is after 50 years of massive growth on a very small island around trade and industry. This is actually a really significant shift in investment in vertical farming systems, in controlled environment agriculture, in RAS-based aquaculture, in cellular agriculture, not just from a domestic food security, but also for export turnkey solutions. So I think, you know, Singapore is really leading the charge, not just to establish an AgriFoodTech hub here for the country, but also for the region, and that's going to be really key. So they're the sorts of investments that are, you know, government-backed but industry-led, will make a huge difference, and that will define actually how, in the COVID world, how companies respond and countries respond.
I fully agree with you that it's the countries which would be very, very, like, you know, the regulators, the governments, they need to set that tone, right? So, and the tone can only be set by putting the money at the right place. So I really appreciate what the government of Singapore is doing with their 2030 project, 30% nutrition in by 2030 from Singapore. And same thing the government of UAE is doing, like, you know, trying to focus on the vertical farms and ensuring that actually you become at least food sufficient, so that when the value chains break, you are not, like, you know, hanging out in dry, right? Now that brings us to the last section of this discussion, Rob. Actually, here we are looking for very pointed advisory for the agri-tech startups who would have just started up and they are just seeing the COVID in front of them, right? Totally like drying up their revenues, and investments are also now challenged because investors would like to invest their existing industries to keep them afloat rather than taking more risk, because they themselves doesn't know how the new normal would be, right? So you find that the new investment are actually, we are already seeing that they're drying up. So what would be your advice to a startup in the current challenges so that they have sufficient oxygen when this whole thing in next, say, year and a half or 2 years goes down and they have opportunities coming back?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, in our particular case, or my personal case, you know, after being, you know, having a career with a multinational and all the support that comes with that for 26 years, to jump out of that and into a startup, it's essentially a startup, is a massive thing, and it takes a huge amount of energy and a shift in focus, and quite possibly, you know, the biggest thing is, you know, having confidence in yourself and your team and your colleagues. I think, you know, first and foremost, you need to look after yourself, because, you know, sometimes in a startup it's quite a lonely job, and what I'd be doing is seeking out, if you don't already have, is seek out a mentor, you know, a peer mentor, or someone you can trust, someone you can talk to, someone who, you know, is able to provide timely, constructive feedback. Not just patting you on the back and saying everything's going to be okay, but actually giving you guidance. So that would be number one. You know, making sure you have access to someone that's supportive. Doesn't need to be in the same industry, but someone that you can trust, and take care of not just your physical health, but also your mental health. Because, you know, if you as a founder fall for whatever reason, that is a huge risk to the business and a huge risk to investors who invested in you. So the second thing is that, you know, investors invest in people. Yes, you know, they carrying amazing ideas, you know, you develop, you have skills and expertise in a particular domain, but first and foremost, an investor invests in you as a founder. And so you have to have a really solid relationship with your current investors, also your cornerstone investors, but also you know, the pipeline of investors that you would like to engage and have on your cap table. So making sure that you keep them up to date on your cash burn, on your runway, making sure you're showing every effort to reduce your cash burn when things are tight. You know, so obviously with travel restrictions, that's probably easier from that aspect, but also showing initiative to look for opportunities in new markets. And we did see this, which is also important for investors, but you know, with this shift, particularly in food products and retail, where you know restaurants are closed, and you know, I'm an investor, but also a great supporter of Fable. Fable Food are a mushroom, shiitake mushroom, soy-based plant product and meat replacement that are doing some amazing things with a differentiated portfolio. Of course, after having everything laid out and a perfect runway for launch in Q1, that was totally disrupted. But moving to a DTC, a direct-to-consumer model with online sales channels and sort of online-offline engagement, you know, what it demonstrates is where, you know, the hunger, they're shifting the focus, but of course the hunger still burns to actually deliver a product to market and to develop out a market segment. That will stand you in really good stead. So when you're in a downturn, you take care of your OPEX, reduce your cost, and try and maintain your market share for the upswing. And when the upswing comes and perhaps, you know, market channels open up and retail, like in Singapore last week, just opened up, you're looking for opportunities to maintain your market share and build your top line or build your revenue on the way out. So, you know, spend as you grow. You don't need to be throwing wads of cash, but at the same time, make sure that you keep in really close contact with your investors and develop out the next iterations of your portfolio. Make sure that you've got the next thing in your back pocket to keep engaging the market without creating too much confusion.
Perfect. Very, very, I'll say that insightful advice. I fully agree with what you just said, that like, you know, one thing is that you have to like, you know, conserve the cash as much as possible. That's very critical. Another thing about the mental health, because you are right that actually like in the end of the day, you need to be strong mentally. Otherwise, things are not going to last long. And I always tell all the founders, like, you know, failure is okay, right? You are more important than your companies. So it's fine. Like, it's fine if you feel that, you know, you're not able to take that stress. Just get out of it. No problem, right? Don't burn yourself to the level where actually, like, you know, the existence becomes a question mark. Because we are seeing a lot of young founders going to the level where actually they are taking the step they should not have been taken. Because of, like, you know, in country like India, the biggest problem is that failure is taken as shame also. So, like, you know, we have to prim them more in saying that failing is not bad. Don't worry, right?
Yeah, just make sure you fail fast. If you're going to fail,
exactly.
Just make sure you fail,
get out of it. Yeah. Maybe wait for 2 years. Like, you know, startup environment is not going to run away. Your intelligence is not going to go away. Restart after 2 years, no problem. But don't burn yourself to the level where your existence itself became a question mark. So great advice from you, Rob, and thanks a lot for giving your time. It was really an honor and a pleasure to talk to you and understand the small nuances of agri-tech industry and how startups can cope with the problem we are facing today, COVID. Thanks a lot and look forward to be in touch with you. Thank you.
No problem. Anytime at all. Thanks, Deepak.